Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to something different. I realise I haven't actually uploaded in a while, and at some point I will put a video out about that, don't worry. Today, however, I'm starting something new. I've been listening to a few audiobooks recently, and the other day I overheard some friends talking about how fondly they actually remember the old Starbound videos on the channel. And then the other night I was inspired to transcribe said Starbound video events into a novel type form for those friends and new ones alike. So please bear in mind, as this is the first time I'm doing anything like this, and one of the first times I'm actually sharing my creative writing with anybody. I mean, I've done little bits here and there, but nothing to this extent. So as a disclaimer, let's get a few disclaimers out of the way about the actual story here before we jump into it. Not all events that are going to be going on here are going to be the same as in the videos. Obviously, those videos are about a video game, and that logic doesn't always translate very well into this kind of format. Also, the general lore and roleplay that was seen in those videos was made up on the spot and obviously had a lot of plot holes. So there'll be many times here where there are new events and paths that'll happen, new conversations and stuff like that. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this audio novel. Bound for the Stars by BurntTNTFreak. Chapter 1. A Matter of Manipulation.
Wake up!
A computer-synthesized voice blurted.
Wake up! You have overslept!
Groggily, Freaky groaned as she rolled onto her side. It took her a few seconds to realise where she was, as the bright light of the room made her shield her face with her hands. As if a light had now suddenly turned on in her also, she jerked her head up, hitting the bunk bed above her with a small thud. She yelped as she scrambled out of bed. Dashing to her locker, she yanked it open and began pulling on her various garments. These were in fact her only clothes, a plain tan farmer's tunic, along some brown corduroy trousers held up by red suspenders. She also donned brown boots and stood in front of the thin, grimy mirror. She nodded her light pink head and made her way for the door. Did I forget to mention, she was a being of pure energy. She had no facial features that could be easily seen. Her body, including her long hair, was a light reddish pinkish colour, and she emitted a small light everywhere she went. Her kind, the Nova kids, were well known for these features. However, what made Freaky different was a lack of branding on her face. Most Nova kids had a symbol where their face would be. This is what seemed to replace their face. Nova kids tended to be a carefree race, and thus they didn't really bother to document their history. As far as she knew, Freaky hadn't gotten her symbol yet, and there was no sign of it appearing today. She dashed for the door as it slid open with a sharp hydraulic hiss. Standing outside was one of her bunkmates, a young woman named Clarissa. She was a dark-skinned human, and she held out a folded uniform. "There you are! Quick! You're up any minute!" Clarissa said, worried. Freaky took the clothes and pulled them on over her outfit quickly. This was her Protectorate uniform. Freaky had joined the Protectorates in the hope she would find her brother, who had gone missing a few years ago. The last she heard from him was a letter he had wrote to her. He spoke about this really cool academy that's purpose was to make the universe a better place. Here Freaky stood now, the home planet of the Protectorates, and it was now time for her to graduate. She had spent weeks, if not months, doing all sorts of training activities, none of them as comfy as the farm she had came from back home. Her parents sent her many letters, worried sick. After all, she had only just turned 18 before she left to find Burn, her brother. Her uniform was blue and bore the mark of the Protectorates on the chest. She smiled to herself for a moment before beginning her speed walk towards the auditorium. Walking through glass walkways, she looked in awe of the technology-filled city that surrounded the headquarters. Small shuttles flew overhead, and distant noise brought her thoughts back to home. The quiet remote farm, the small barn that she would hide in to read her books. She missed it dearly, but pressed on walking, sure that soon she would get a lead on Burn's whereabouts. She walked past fellow students as she took a shortcut through the cherry blossom gardens, catching a few of the falling petals in her hands. Soon she was walking down the main hall and past the large portraits of the Protectorate founders. She had no time to stop and stare though, as the stairs to the stage were suddenly upon her. She quickly and quietly joined the small line of similarly dressed graduates at the side of the stage and breathed a sigh of relief as the lights began to dim suddenly. It seemed she had been just in time. Freaky peeked around to see if she knew anyone else advancing today. She spied 2 girls who she had seen in other classes. The first was Ash, a Floran girl who had pale green plant-like skin and long auburn hair. Freaky hadn't got the chance to speak to her much in the construction class they shared, as Ash always seemed hyper-focused on her work. Ash was in a similar uniform, only hers was grey, and she was wearing a dark grey bandana in her hair to keep it under control. The second was a human girl named Casey. She had very pale, almost white skin, contrasted by her long dark blue hair. Her outfit was also grey, but it seemed that she had torn off the sleeves. Casey had always been rather rebellious, as Freaky had seen in the weapons training classes. Casey was always the first to pick a weapon, and tended to show great mastery in using them. "My fellow protectors," an older man started. He stood at a podium on the stage, and a spotlight shone on him. A large audience, all in varying colours, bearing the Protectorate symbol, sat before him. Freaky recognised him as one of the founders she had just observed from the portraits. His voice was deep and confident. "Today we come together to witness the Protectorate grow." He took a moment to look off stage at Freaky and her fellow graduates as the audience clapped. "For over 500 years we have stood proud here on Earth, drawing together races of all kinds in the name of peace. Our task, to protect our fellow beings, to support, house, and educate those that seek our aid, and to foster accord between those that aspire to it." Freaky smiled to herself, a little in pride, but a little in shame. She hadn't joined for any of those reasons. She had her one goal. Hearing the old man's speech, though, ignited something in her. She felt a passion, one that she suspected her brother also felt when he learned about these people. He'd always hated the injustices that befell each and every race, and Freaky knew that an organisation like this was exactly what he was looking for. "Today, in the name of peace, we welcome our newest compatriots, and present them each with our greatest tool," the old man continued, snapping Freaky out of her trance. She looked up and saw the man was now holding the very tool he was talking about. It was the matter manipulator, an invention of the Protectorates that was able to create and destroy matter at will. It had the general appearance of a gun, however it lacked the lethality that a gun provided. The one he was holding, like the rest he had on hand, were very basic, only able to be used sparingly and at close range. It seems all Protectorates got one of these when they graduated. The man nodded, and Casey, who was first in line, walked on stage as the old man handed her the matter manipulator he was holding. He then shook her hand as she began walking to the other side of the stage, before disappearing into the darkness. Next, a human male, who Freaky had never seen before, walked on stage and got his matter manipulator before walking off stage. Ash, who was next and also in front of Freaky, turned to her for a moment and gave her a smile, before walking out and doing the same as the last two. The old man nodded at Freaky as she let out a nervous breath and took a step. However, as soon as she did, the ground began to shake violently. The yellow curtains beside the stage shook as Freaky and everyone else did their best to stay on their feet. All seemed to go quiet when suddenly, from every angle, large, deep purple tentacles burst from the walls, the floor and the ceiling. Parts of the roof began to collapse as people dashed to escape. Some were crushed by debris, others grabbed by the slimy appendages, and the rest hit by them. Freaky dove to the ground for cover as she peered through her fingers. The old man gripped the side of the podium as he looked around in terror. More tremors came as he looked at Freaky.
"Take this! Get out of here!"
he shouted as he tossed the matter manipulator towards Freaky. It tumbled on the ground and slid just shy of her. As she began reaching for it, the ground below the old man cracked as another tentacle burst from below him, grabbing him and decimating the lectern. In a moment, he was pulled into the ground and gone without a trace. Freaky shook her head in disbelief as she grabbed the manipulator and made a mad dash for the opposite side of the stage, where those before her had gone. Her way back was seemingly blocked by a large steel girder. Once through the darkness of the curtain, Freaky emerged into the hallway. Destruction laid before her. The walls cracked, lights broken and flickering, and a path blocked by a mound of dirt that had collapsed from the gardens above. Looking at the manipulator in her hand, she aimed it at the mound and pulled the trigger. In moments, the dirt pile was no more, and a door revealed to her. Making her way through and down some stairs, she felt her feet suddenly grow soggy from the now flooded antechamber she stood in. Water seeped in through a large cracked window a few feet away, and Freaky saw some helpless fish who were just as confused as she was. Shaking her head, she spotted the ladder and made her way up it and outside of the facility. Behind her was a large cooling fan that immediately blew cold air into her face and made her long hair flow heroically for just a moment. Running along the roof, she came to a large wall. Seeing no other way to scale it, Freaky knew she had no other choice but to re-enter the HQ. Climbing down a surprisingly spacious air duct, she fumbled and fell back into some more knee-high water. There was no way back up now, and Freaky's heart raced, hoping she hadn't just doomed herself. Seeing an opening, she made her way to one of the glass walkways, and in the distance, what seemed to be the spaceport. Bingo! Her way out of here. As she began to run, she barely stopped in time for a tentacle sprung through the glass below her. It wasn't as big as the tentacles earlier, but it definitely looked deadly. It seemed to be feeling around before it retreated out of sight. Freaky didn't waste any time as she ran even faster over the walkway and into another room. It seemed like a storage area with large metal containers littered everywhere. With trepidation, Freaky made her way to the other side of the room, hoping for an exit. The lights flickered ever so often as she heard cries and rumbles from behind her. As she spied what looked like a door, Freaky was hit in the face with something slimy. Getting to her feet, she saw it was another tentacle. This one was even smaller than the last, and it seemed firmly rooted in its place. This place also happened to be where the door was. Laying nearby was the mangled body of the human boy who had graduated only a few minutes ago. His mass manipulator sat in pieces on the floor next to him, his body bent in all the wrong angles. Fortunately for Freaky, the dim red light made it hard for her to see any more than this. She then noticed, nearby the body, a cracked and battered sword. Freaky stared at it, trembling. Even though she had done hours upon hours of combat training, she had never planned to use it. Freaky had never liked violence, especially when it could be avoided. Maybe it was her naivety, or the many fantasy books she used to read at home, but Freaky always wanted to find the peaceful solution to conflict. At home, she was always the one to calm family disagreements, and often would stay up for days tending to the sick livestock and cattle. In this moment though, Freaky knew that her only way out of this was to kill the tentacle. Picking up the sword, which was a lot heavier than she expected, she closed her eyes and swung down hard as she charged at the door. With a sick squelch, the tentacle flopped onto the floor and flopped around like a fish out of water as Freaky ran through the door, not daring to look back. She winced as light blinded her. She was outside again, and standing right behind a huge thruster. It was a ship, a spaceship, and it seemed to be purring to life. A small door on its side was open as white synthetic light poured out of it. The stairs leading to the door began to retract as Freaky squealed. "Wait!" she yelled as she dashed towards them, only just managing to get up them and collapse into the door as it sealed itself shut. Panting, Freaky found herself in a small room. She realised it to be the airlock, and with a small hissing sound, she knew she was locked in there. She felt the ship begin to move. Someone was obviously piloting it. She heard thuds and scrapes, as said driver must not have been very experienced. She dragged herself to a small porthole window in the chamber and peered out. She could see that they were now speeding into the air at a 45-degree angle, along with many others doing the same. Looking down at the planet, she saw tentacles almost 100 times larger than the ones she had seen earlier. They were tearing down skyscrapers like paper mache, and swiping at fleeing ships with a scary amount of accuracy. A ship flying not far from them was gone in an instant when the tentacle arose from beneath the large amounts of smoke that now enveloped the surface of the earth. The ship that was hit broke apart, sending pieces flying everywhere. A large chunk suddenly collided with their ship, causing massive turbulence. This sent Freaky flying into the back wall of the airlock, and then everything went dark.